Okay, great. Well, I want to welcome everyone to this afternoon's webinar titled Enhancing Agility and a Future-Ready Mindset in Your Organization. My name is Raymond Lee, and just a couple of housekeeping items before I introduce Ryan this afternoon. As you can imagine, we do have a large group today, so everyone is in listen-only mode. If you have questions throughout today's session, encourage you to use the Q&A box that you see at the panel on the bottom of your screen. We will be asking some questions. Ryan's going to be posing some questions to the group, so please use the chat box for your comments so we can see your responses, and please share with the panelists and all attendees so we can see your responses. So we'll look forward to that. And again, as I mentioned, my name is Raymond Lee. I'm the CEO of Career Minds. We're a virtual outplacement company and the sponsor of today's event. Career Minds has been providing outplacement since 2008. So I'm really excited to introduce today's speaker, Ryan Godfredson. Ryan is a mental success coach and cutting-edge leadership consultant, author, trainer, and researcher. He helps improve organizations, leaders, teams, and employees by improving their mindsets. Ryan is currently a leadership and management professor at Cal State Fullerton. He holds a PhD in organizational behavior and human resources from Indiana University and a BA from Brigham Young University. And he's the author of Success Mindsets, the key to unlocking great success in your life, work, and leadership. And I have to tell you, over the last couple of weeks, those who have been on our webinars, we've had a lot of topics around, some of the HR practices that you're faced with on a regular basis, like furloughs and PPP and the FFRCA and all of those other legal things that you're dealing with. And I'm really glad to have Ryan here today, really focus on mindsets and how we can help our employees have more of a growth mindset. And so with that, Ryan, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you kick things off. Welcome.
All right. Sounds great. Thank you so much, Raymond. And it's great to be with all of you. I'm going to stop sharing my video here in just a minute, but I wanted to just wave to you and make sure you could see me and at least have a friendly face here. And I appreciate this opportunity, Raymond. And as we're going to be talking about agility and future readiness, I don't know if this topic could be any more timely. So I'm excited to jump into some of this. And as Raymond said, I want to develop some interaction. And Raymond, you may be even interested to know this because we had connected yesterday. And since we connected yesterday, my book, Success Mindsets, which is a new book, I found out hit the USA Today bestseller list. Which was great. And then I sent it over to my brother and he looked at the list and he said, yeah, I don't think this is a very big deal because there's a Pout Pout Fish book that's 2 ahead of yours. So if you can't beat that book, then you're in trouble. So we had a good laugh over that. But I'm excited to talk to you about some of the concepts that are in my book related to mindsets. And so let's go ahead and jump into this. All right, and if you have any questions or anything that comes up, feel free to chat those in. So let me give you a little bit of a recent timeline, at least from my perspective. So for the last 2 years, I've been talking to organizations about agility and future readiness. And 2 or more months ago, so if we were to go back 2 months and any time prior to this, when I would be talking to organizations about agility and future readiness, the general response that I would get from these organizations is, well, it's important for us to become agile and future ready, but it's not urgent for us. We've got more important fish to fry at the moment. In fact, here's a slide that I pulled from a deck that I used just 3 months ago, and I asked them, are you concerned about the future of your organization? And do you feel confident that you can navigate the changes that will occur in the future? And when I generally ask these questions, I'm not getting a very excited response from those in the audience. They're sitting back thinking, I think we could do better than what we're doing. Well, now since even just 2 months ago, COVID-19 hit, and ready or not, we've been forced to be agile, or at least as agile as we can. So as Raymond mentioned, I'm a professor at California State University, Fullerton, and we had to move everything online almost overnight. And we've had to be agile. Now, the question that we need to ask ourselves is, how have we reacted to this? How has your organization reacted? How have you personally reacted to this? Has it been a healthy transition? Has it been a frustrating transition? Has it been a transition that's gone maybe as well as can be expected? And I think that that's where we are at Cal State Fullerton. I would say I don't consider ourselves to be an agile and future-ready organization, and I haven't. We're a large government-run state bureaucracy. And so I've been pleasantly surprised of how we've been able to navigate some of these changes. But we've kind of anticipated that these changes would be short-lived, and come to find out is they're going to be a little bit more long-lasting than we anticipated. And really, in my domain in education, I think the face of education is going to be completely different moving forward. And my guess is you probably think similarly in your industry. And so the question now becomes, how do we become more future ready? Because this upheaval is just one upheaval of many that we're going to see in the coming years. And hopefully they're not as dramatic as this, but every industry has been seeing more and more and larger upheavals. And so we've got to develop the capabilities as organizations to handle and navigate those in effective ways. So let's even just pause here for a moment and let me have you grade your organization. So here's the question: how confident are you that your organization currently possesses the characteristics that will ensure it will be successful 5, 10, 20 years from now? So give that an A, B, C, or D in the chat, and let's see what you think and if we see any patterns.
Well,
All right.
Good news so far. I don't think I've seen one D, Ryan. I think I'm
that
seeing
is
mostly A's and B's. So that's pretty good.
Really
Couple
good.
C's.
And not that that's inaccurate. It makes me wonder, because the context that I have is not all organizations feel that way. And so if you are going to be answering with a C or D, you may not feel inclined to jump on a webinar like this. Whereas if we're feeling a little bit more confident, then we could peel ourselves away for a webinar like this, which is good. So that's great to hear that we're feeling like we can move forward in effective ways. And so really the purpose today is to help you gain clarity on how to make your organization more agile and more future ready. We really want to set you up for success and give you a sense of clarity of what you need to focus on to be successful. And so I've got another thing here where I want you to chat in some responses. Is if you look at your industry, across the organizations in your industry, some are going to be more successful than others in the next 5, 10, and 20 years. So what are the characteristics of organizations that are not going to be successful in your industry 5, 10, or 20 years from now? Let's see what we come up with in terms of the list. I'll probably actually write down some of these as they come in. So from your perspective, what characteristics do organizations possess that currently that are going to prevent them from being successful moving forward in the future? So we're seeing siloed, not adaptable, stuck in a 2019 mindset. It's crazy that we're saying that, right? Bureaucracy, not listening, same old way, stuck in command and control. Good. Hierarchical, siloed, right? So we're seeing some things here. Fear of change, I think that's a great one. Arrogance is another great one. Ego, good. And we could probably do this all day. Let me have us pause on this question and let me move to another question. That's just the flip of that. What are the characteristics of organizations that are going to be successful? So these are characteristics that they possess now that's going to allow them to be successful 5, 10, 20 years from now. So invest in technology, open to change, adaptable, forward thinking, good, high EQ. Allie says a growth mindset. She read the notes here in advance, I guess. Digital, desire to be the innovator, okay to make mistakes. That's huge. I love that. And so as you're looking at these, I think one of the things that I'm reading into and how you answered your question, and you give your organizations largely A's and B's on how confident you are that your organization will move forward. Are you saying that you're confident that your organization will invest in technology, be open to change, adaptable, high EQ, have growth mindset, okay to be wrong, that you trust your staff? Like, my experience working with organizations is that most leaders in organizations feel like that's the case, but when we dive into the employees of the organization, they don't necessarily feel the same way. And that's not an uncommon finding across a wide variety of spectrums. But what we've just done here is we've identified some characteristics of low levels of future readiness. So these organizations are traditional, they're change resistant, risk adverse, comfort seeking, problem avoiding, and largely they're kind of stagnant and complacent. And maybe it's because of the ego or their arrogance that they have is, this has worked for who knows how long, it's going to continue to work. But then we've also identified different characteristics of organizations that have higher levels of future readiness, such as they're innovative, they're change willing, opportunistic, purpose seeking, problem solving, and agile. And so what we've just done in this exercise is we've essentially set up a continuum that ranges from low levels of future readiness to high levels of future readiness. And now we can ask ourselves the question, where is our organization along this continuum? Are we more traditional or more innovative? Are we more change resistant or change willing? Are we risk adverse? Are we opportunistic, right? So you'll probably get a sense of where you're at. But I also think that it's not only important for us to consider this at an organizational level, I also think it's important for us to consider this at a personal level. I don't know about you, but going through this COVID-19 situation is I've recognized that my future is a lot more uncertain than I thought it would be. And I feel fortunate that I'm able to move my responsibilities at the university online. But now we're hearing we've got a 20% decline in enrollment in the fall. What does that mean for me? I'm also going up for tenure in the fall. What does that mean for my long-term viability at the university? It's just much more uncertain than I had anticipated. And if I want to be in a position where I'm continually successful over time, I've got to develop personally more of those characteristics on the right. And so it's my guess is that whether at an organizational level or at a personal level, most of us are somewhere that is other than the far right side of this continuum, which means we've got some room to grow and develop. And so then the question becomes, how do we start to bridge this gap from wherever we are to becoming more agile and future ready? And what doesn't work, but what we typically try to do is focusing on increasing technical skills. I think a lot of times, and this can also involve changing policies and procedures. These are kind of the typical hammers that we're using to just pound out any nails or any screws. We're going to continually go towards our hammers. So this is not going to work moving forward, and it's particularly with improving our agility and future readiness. But what will work is increasing adaptive skills. And there's a fantastic book that's called Immunity to Change. And in this book, they talk about this importance of developing adaptive skills relative to technical skills. And what they say is many, if not most, of the change challenges you face today and will face tomorrow require something more than incorporating new technical skills into your current mindset. The change challenges you face can only be met by transforming your mindset, by advancing to a more sophisticated stage of mental development. And I think these authors are really onto something, because if we want to move up in agility and future readiness, that is going to require an upgrade in our mental development. We've got to upgrade our mental maturity and what they call in this book, mental complexity. Our ability to navigate complexity as opposed to try to just simplify things and take a stance on one side or the other. Those that are more mentally mature, mentally complex, can sit in the middle of complexity and understand the pros and cons of the different options that surround them. And I want to give you an example of an organization that I feel did this really well, where they focused on more developing these adaptive skills more than the technical skills, and it had a huge benefit for the organization. And this organization is Microsoft. So I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but from 2001 to 2014, Microsoft's market capitalization and stock price stayed consistent from 2001 to 2014. Well, what happened during this time? Well, all of their competitors started to fly past them. The Apples, the Googles, the Amazons, even Facebook, all started to fly by them. Now, Microsoft during this time period was not a small company. Their market capitalization was around $250 to $300 million. But the organizations that were flying past them were starting to inch closer to that $1 trillion mark. And many experts were considering Microsoft as being dead in the water. Well, that's surely not the case now, as we're going to get to. But what happened in 2014 that caused this ship to change, where Microsoft dramatically changed its trajectory? Well, Satya Nadella took over as CEO. And what has happened since then is Microsoft's market cap and stock price has quadrupled. They've now passed the $1 trillion mark, and that may depend on the day, depending on how the market is going. But it is now, depending on the day, one of the four most valuable organizations in the world right now. They went from being essentially dead in the water to being as cutting edge and as agile and future ready as I think you can be. Well, what spurred this change? What allowed Satya Nadella to have this impact? Well, what he did is he focused on these adaptive skills, and that all relates to our mindsets. So he very quickly instituted trainings on mindsets, particularly a growth mindset. What he had learned is that his employees and leaders were more concerned about being know-it-alls. There's the ego and the arrogance that you talked about earlier, as opposed to learn-it-alls. And so on the employee badges, he put that we are moving from being know-it-alls to being learn-it-alls. He posts monthly videos about what he's learned. He had a renewed focus on meeting the unmet, often unarticulated needs of customers. So he told his employees that you've got to meet more face-to-face with our customers, because the more you understand their pain, then the more adaptive that we are going to be. And he even set up an empathy museum to try to change some of the mindsets that they had, that we don't need to be right all the time and we don't need to look good. We need to better understand. And so I think it's really important that we focus on mindsets and understand what mindsets are. And our mindsets are our mental lenses that shape how we view the world around us. And how we view the world around us shapes how we process in our world, and it shapes how we behave in our world. Oftentimes, I'd like to call our mindsets our mental fuel filters, because our mindsets serve three primary jobs. When we encounter a situation, our senses are absorbing way more information that we could process. And so what ends up happening is we rely upon our mindsets as our frontline defense to this overloading information. And our mindsets are what filter in specific information into our brain that we will go on to process. So that's the first job, is they're filtering the most important and relevant information according to our mindsets. Second, they interpret those mindsets in unique ways, or they interpret that information in unique ways. And then third, they activate our thinking, our learning, and our behavior, and consequently our success in our life and our work and our leadership. So truly our mindsets are foundational to everything that we do. So I saw a question come in, what's an empathy museum? To be honest, I don't know a whole lot other than that. Satya Nadella talks a little bit about that in his book called Hit Refresh. But my impression was it was a move to help people become more sympathetic and empathetic to others. So hopefully.
Hey, Ryan, I was curious. So I was really fascinated about the Microsoft story as well. And what if you're a small company and you have a CEO who clearly has a fixed mindset? In his situation, he was very much growth minded, but do you have advice for HR leaders who, like, how do you address that? Do you have any, and hopefully I'm not pulling you off topic here,
No,
but I
you're
was
great.
just curious, what your thoughts are about that.
No, it's such a great question, because even with Microsoft, you look at the prior CEO, which was Steve Ballmer, and I think you can make the case that he didn't have a growth mindset and some of the other mindsets. And in fact, Simon Sinek in his book, The Infinite Game, highlights Microsoft and these two leaders because of that. It seemed like Steve Ballmer was competitive, and Satya Nadella has been collaborative. Like Microsoft is now partnering with Apple on all sorts of things, whereas in the past they never would have done those things. And that's opened up a world of opportunity for them, and that's been part of their success. And so I think it is really the leaders, organizational leaders' mindsets are critically important. And it is a challenge to help leaders awaken to their mindsets and shift their mindsets, but it's something that's doable. And it usually takes a little bit about what we are going to talk about. We've got to give people a framework to be able to think about our mindsets, because I think a lot of people understand mindsets are important, but they don't know exactly what mindsets lead to success. And that's kind of where we're going to go. And we could develop different initiatives to make some of that transformation. In fact, one of the things I'm going to do in this presentation is an example of an organization's collective mindsets and what that might say about the organization, and how we use that information to help leaders kind of awaken to these mindsets, which for most of us we're non-conscious to, but they're directing everything that we do. So really what our job is as HR leaders is we've got to help our leaders become conscious of their normally non-conscious mindsets. Does that make sense? Do you think that sets us up in a good direction moving forward?
Yeah, and listen, I asked you a really tough question because sometimes you're not going to change that behavior, and the board of directors or some external entity may have to help make some decisions that aren't necessarily within your influence, but I think you can maybe try to influence through through this learning approach versus command and control. So anyway, I appreciate you indulging me.
No, for sure. And we've also got to understand that these leaders are doing the best that they can. They've just got some hidden assumptions and blocks that are just beneath the surface that we need to uncover a little bit. I mean, I was on a phone call just the other day with a woman who had read my book, and she said, until I read your book, I thought I was a great mother, but now I see that I've got some work to do. Well, right. I think that most people are like that, myself included, is we are navigating life in the best way we know possible, but our current best isn't necessarily the very best. And it's not until we're exposed to that gap that we then develop the motivation to enhance our awakening and move forward.
That's a great point.
So what we just talked about is really our mindsets are foundational to everything that we do because they are our first line of defense against all this information that we're bombarded with. And depending upon the information that our mindsets allow in and how we interpret it, that explains why two different people can see the same thing but interpret it so differently. And depending upon how we interpret our world, shapes how we think and how we learn and how we behave. And as I alluded to, is one of the challenges is, because I think most of us understand that mindsets are important, our big challenge is what mindsets do we need to focus on? And that's my driving question when I first started to do research on mindsets, is what mindsets do I need to focus on to become more successful, become more agile, more future ready? And it turns out that mindsets have been researched for over 30 years in psychology, in education, in management, and in marketing. And most of the research kind of exists in independent pockets from each other. But they're all telling the same story. Mindsets drive our thinking, learning, and behavior. And so what I've done with my work is I've just identified these different mindsets and I put them into one framework. And so what we're going to move forward in talking about are 3 different sets of mindsets. All 3 of these sets are not my good ideas. These are backed by 30 plus years of research. And one of the things that's unique about this research is that independently, they've all identified that there's a negative side of the continuum and a positive side. And so the 3 mindset sets that we're going to focus on are fixed and growth, closed and open, and prevention and promotion. So for this next little bit, I'm going to go over what each of these are and help us understand how they might affect us and our agility and future readiness. And then I'm going to ask you again to kind of grade where you feel like your organization is along each of these continuums. And so let's jump into these here. So let's focusing first on fixed and growth mindsets. And this is the one that has been the most researched and probably the most well-known because of Carol Dweck's work and her great book. But when we have a fixed mindset, we see ourselves and others as being unable to change our talents, abilities, and intelligence. Those with the growth mindset, we see ourselves and others as being able to change our talents, abilities, and intelligence. And what Carol Dweck's research has found is about half of the population has a fixed mindset and the other half has a growth mindset. And the reason why these are important is because if we believe that we are fixed, that we can't change our talents, abilities, and intelligence, what happens when we fail? Well, we're left to interpret that failure as if we are a failure. Whereas those with a growth mindset, they don't interpret failure that way at all. They see it as an opportunity to learn and grow. So when we have this fixed mindset and we don't believe that we can improve, we want to avoid failure. Or another way of flipping that is our primary focus is on looking good. We want to validate ourselves as a have, and we don't want to be seen as a have not. So we avoid challenges. We give up easily because we don't believe that others can improve. We're naturally going to provide lower quality and lower quantity feedback. And we're going to have a tendency that success should come naturally. So for example, my freshman year of college, I was thinking I wanted to be a medical doctor and I signed up for the Weeder chemistry class. And I ended up getting a C, which to me was a failing grade. And my thought process was, well, since this didn't come naturally to me, I better change my major. And that's what I did. My fixed mindset told me that that was the best option. But when we have a growth mindset, our focus is not on how we look and validating ourselves. Our focus is on learning and growing and performing and excelling. We embrace challenges. We persist beyond failure. We're more likely to develop those that we lead. And we see that success takes effort. So now looking back on my 18, 19-year-old self, my freshman year of college, is if I had a growth mindset, rather than just give up on my dreams of becoming a medical doctor because of one class, it would have been better for me to reevaluate my study habits and recognize becoming a medical doctor isn't going to be easy, and I might need to put more time and effort into it. I just didn't allow myself to grow from that experience. I gave up and I shifted. So that's what happens when people have a fixed versus growth mindset. So we can ask ourselves, who's going to be more primed for current and future success? People with a fixed mindset or people with a growth mindset? And that seems pretty clear. So let me pause here and ask you this question, or have you rate your organization. What grade would you give your organization, A, B, C, D, F, on having a growth mindset from your perspective? Let's see what you put. So now that we know some of these differences, Raymond, I'm seeing a lot of B's and C's. So before, when we were rating these earlier, we were seeing a lot of A's and B's. And now that we dive into this, it's, right? And it's just because we're honing in on some of these details. And what I find when I work with organizations, and I've put together collective mindset reports for 60 plus groups or organizations, and I could probably count on one hand how many organizations have a collective growth mindset. Most of the organizations, so at least 90% of the organizations that I've worked with have been more on the fixed side in terms of their collective mindsets.
You know, it's interesting, Ryan, what I think about is we're watching these responses come in is, when you look at your organization, when things are great, you know, economy strong and things are humming, is it less obvious as to where you fall versus when times are tough? And like, I was just thinking where we are right now, and, you know, there's a lot of this uncertainty in the world, and are companies more exposed in their fixed versus growth when things are tough versus when things seem to be running good?
That's a great question. I think we are more sensitive to the fixed mindset when things aren't going well, for sure. But also, one of the things that we need to understand is that when we're in a challenging situation, regardless of what mindset we have to begin with, the challenging situation is socially incentivizing us to self-protect, right? So when COVID-19 hits and business starts shutting down, our natural inclination is to be this turtle that's kind of going into our shell. And that pull and the self-protecting attitude does incentivize us to develop more of this fixed mindset, or in this instance, a desire to look good, because that's a form of self-protection. So we're kind of putting our neck in our shells as opposed to keeping it out here and thinking, how do I learn and grow? What can I learn from this? What opportunities are now available because of this? As opposed to, how do we continually look good to our shareholders?
Sure.
So I think this is why this topic is so timely, is because our current economic situation is naturally incentivizing our leaders and our employees to self-protect. And the more that we self-protect, the less agile we become.
Great point.
So that's fixed and growth mindsets. The next set is closed versus open. And this is simply how closed or open our minds are to the ideas and suggestions of others. And I want us to compare this to two different buckets. On the bucket on the left is full, right? So if we compare our mind to this full bucket, that means that we tend to think that what we know is best. In other words, our bucket is full. And so what happens when we try to pour something into a full bucket? Well, we can't take in any of that information. It all runs off the side. Whereas those with an open mindset, they just leave room in their bucket for the idea that they can be wrong. And when we leave that room, we're able to take in the ideas and suggestions of others. So those with a closed mindset, because they believe that what they know is best, they're focused on being right. They want to have their ideas supported. They want to be the one providing answers and not asking questions. So they're largely out of touch They avoid feedback, they avoid new perspectives, and they see disagreement as a threat. But those with an open mindset who believe that they can be wrong, they're not concerned about being right. Like, that's not a part of their ego. They're so much more concerned about finding truth and thinking optimally. Thus, they're asking questions, they're seeking to understand, they're seeking feedback, and they're inviting new perspectives. So again, we can ask ourselves, who's going to be more primed for current and future success? Those with a closed mindset or those with an open mindset? And so here, let's have you grade your organization again. How's your organization doing on having an open mindset? A, B, C, D, or F? So this one, I think we've got a little bit more variance. We're starting to see some D's and C's in here, but we still have some A's, but I would say kind of largely on that B to C range. Interesting. So why is it so important for us to have an open mindset? Well, when we have a closed mindset, we come across as unapproachable and off-putting. We fail to gain a more complete perspective. We fail to learn, and thus our thinking and decision-making becomes of lower quality. But when we have an open mindset, it creates the number one factor that fuels high-performance teams. And this is probably something we should all know. And Google, through several years of research and millions of dollars, they found that their top-performing teams had one characteristic that was similar, and that was psychological safety, the belief that you could speak up and take risk without fear of negative repercussion. And the only way that we're going to have psychological safety is if we have these open mindsets. Do you want to add anything to this, Raymond, before we jump into the last set?
Yeah, I was just going to say something. In terms of the open mindset, it's almost like companies are forced to have an open mindset because of the situation. Just in terms of people working virtually for years, companies have not given employees that opportunity, and now that they're forced into it, it's almost like you have to be open to different opportunities for how work gets done. I was just thinking of that as an example, but Amy Edmondson's work around psychological safety is such a great point here. So just thought I'd share that.
No, it's great. In fact, I'm a former Gallup consultant. I don't know how many of you are familiar with their Q12 measure, but their Q12 is designed to assess engagement in the workforce. And what they find in their entire database is 35% of employees are engaged based upon their classification. And I think all of the 12 things that they measure on their Q12, and you can Google the Q12 and find all the different factors, but I think all of them are important. But I always had the question in my mind before I started working at Google, which one is the most important? And Gallup will never answer that question, but I got my hands on as much data as I could, which was 9 organizations and 60,000 employees at the time. And what I found is that the one item that was driving engagement the strongest was the item Q07, which is my opinions count at work. And if an employee could strongly agree to that, given a 5 on a 5-point scale, then 95% of those employees were engaged. And this kind of makes sense in retrospect, because if we have a voice, we feel valued. And if we feel valued, we feel engaged. But in order for us to have a voice, there's got to be an open mindset and a psychologically safe culture. And given the fact that 35% of employees are engaged, that's saying that most organizations don't have that level of psychological safety. So that's closed versus open. Next is prevention versus promotion. When we have a prevention mindset, we're focused on not losing. When we have a promotion mindset, we're focused on winning and gains. And so to explain this, if we are a captain of a boat in the middle of the ocean with a prevention mindset, our number one focus is on not sinking. We don't want any problems to occur. We don't want to take any risks. We don't want to rock the boat. But those with a promotion mindset, it's not that they're not concerned about sinking. They are, but their number one focus is on a destination and making progress towards it. And so how this plays out is that when the storms come on the horizon, as they inevitably will, those with the prevention mindset will run from the storm because they want to stay afloat. They want to play it safe. And they'll end up in a destination that they didn't necessarily decide. But those with the promotion mindset, when they see that storm, and if that stands between them and their destination, they'll prepare to take on the storm. And they'll take the risk of braving the storms and its winds and its currents that go along with it. And so at the end of the day, those with the prevention mindset get blown about by the winds and the currents of the sea, whereas it's those with the promotion mindset, they're the ones who end up in a destination of their own proactive design. And so we've kind of largely gone over this table, but to keep things consistent, we could again ask ourselves, who's going to be more primed for current and future success? And let me have you grade your organization and how you think that your organization is doing on this. Seeing some B's and C's. Keep those coming in. Charles asked, can you unpack urgent versus important? So when we have that prevention mindset, we're focused on the urgency of the situation, avoiding the things that may cause problems. And again, it's not that those are unimportant for those with the promotion mindset. They are concerned about those, but they're focused on what is really important, which is getting to the destination. And so those with the prevention mindset are more concerned, kind of get wrapped up in that urgent and important quadrant, whereas those with the promotion mindset have a tendency to operate in that important and not urgent quadrant, which is more effective. Jack asks, is there a difference between being at the mercy of the winds of the sea and seeking a safe harbor? So largely the difference between a prevention mindset and a promotion mindset is the difference between being comfort focused and being purpose focused. And so when we're comfort focused, we will be at the mercy of the winds of the sea, and we will be seeking a safe harbor generally, particularly when the winds pop up. But those with a promotion mindset who are more purpose centered, they become willing to brave the difficult seas in order to get to their destination. So we're seeing a lot. I would say I'm seeing less A's in what's come through in this evaluation. So this is really interesting because at the outset, I got the indication that we're thinking we're really future ready, and even agile. But as we look at each of these things, I think that what we've seen come through in terms of these grades are just maybe lower than we anticipated. And so what we've got to make some connections here. So we've focused on these three sets of mindsets, and we can kind of ask ourselves, where do we stand on each of these continuums? And then what we need to understand is that these mindsets are foundational to the future ready characteristics that we identified previously. That the more growth, open, and promotion minded, naturally we're going to be more innovative, change willing, opportunistic, purpose seeking, problem solving, and agile. And so I think a lot of times when organizations want to make shifts in agility and future readiness, they focus on policies, procedures, trainings that are designed to help enhance these characteristics. But if we aren't focusing on the mindsets, the prevailing negative mindsets are going to continually resist our efforts to make us more agile and future ready. So the best way to develop both ourselves and our organizations is to first focus on our foundation, on our mindsets. As we shift our mindsets forward and more towards the positive side, naturally our thinking, our behaviors, and our outcomes are going to improve along with that. So we can ask ourselves, who's going to be more successful 5, 10, 20 years from now? Those with fixed, closed, and prevention mindsets, or those with growth, open, and promotion mindsets? And I think that that's pretty clear. And I want to give you an example of some of the collective mindsets that I found with an organization I've worked with. I would say that this organization is not untypical across the different organizations that I've worked with. In this particular case, it's a banking client. And what we found is that we had the individual leaders, and it looks like we had about 100 of the leaders in the organization take this, and they all got their individual mindset results, and then I aggregated these up to the collective level. And this is something that we could potentially explore with your organizations if you're interested. But what we found here is that if we look at quartiles on this continuum of fixed to growth mindsets, is over half of these leaders had a strong fixed mindset. And as a whole, 71% of them were on the fixed mindset side. And this meant that the leaders, just the way that they see the world and the way that they process the world, they're more inclined to focus on looking good than they are learning and growing. So it seemed to be very strongly in this self-protection mode. When we look at closed to open, what we see here is most of them, almost 60%, are on the closed mindset side. Almost 1 in 3 have a strong closed mindset, and only 15% have that strong open mindset, which is most conducive for creating a psychologically safe environment. And then on this last set, what we're finding is 65% of these leaders had a prevention mindset, and almost 2 in 5 had a strong prevention mindset. And one of the reasons I think is this isn't necessarily unique to banking, but banking is a highly regulatory environment, which naturally incentivizes organizations and organizational leaders to want to play it safe and prioritize that more than reaching goals. And in fact, there was a recent research study just published in Personnel Psychology that found when an organization tries to focus on both prevention and promotion at the same time, employees' commitment in that organization is low because they're getting a dual message that they can't attach to. Employees' commitment is higher if they're if they're focused primarily on prevention, or if they're focused primarily on promotion. And so that's at the commitment level. But all of the research on these different sets of mindsets suggests that the organizations that focus more on a promotion mindset, their employees have higher task performance, higher innovative performance, higher engagement, higher satisfaction. And there seems to be only one benefit to having a prevention mindset, and that is a lower safety incident rate. So not that that's unimportant, but that seems to be the only benefit according to meta-analyses on these different mindsets. So going back to Microsoft, when Satya Nadella took over, here's what he found in his organization. He found employees that had the desire to look good, be right, and avoid problems. I mean, are these bad desires to have? Well, no, not necessarily, at least at the surface, because who wants to look bad, be wrong, and have problems? Well, nobody. But these desires are attached to these negative mindsets. And the reason why they're negative is because they are self-focused. And when we have these mindsets and their associated desires, as I mentioned, we are in self-protection mode. And we're not going to be agile and future ready. We've got to shift, develop more positive mindsets. We've got to make the shift from having a desire to look good to having a desire to learn and grow. Instead of a desire to be right, a desire to find truth. And instead of a desire to avoid problems, a desire to reach goals. And as we make that shift, we move from self-protection mode to organization advance mode. So to go back to that quote from Immunity to Change is if we want to make a shift in agility and future readiness, we can't focus on technical skills, policies, or procedures. We've got to build up adaptive skills, and that comes through a focus on mindsets. So hopefully you feel like we've made that connection there. And so as a whole, and we can open this for question and answers with the time that we have left, as a whole, we have no clue what the future is going to bring. But if we want to navigate it effectively, we've got to develop the skills and characteristics for agility and future readiness. And so hopefully this is giving you a clear focus or a clear understanding of what you need to focus on in order to make that happen. And that's mindsets. So if you happen to be interested in my book, there's some information here, or if you want to reach out and talk to me about any of this or doing any potential work in your organization to assess the mindsets and awaken leaders to their own mindsets and help them make some shifts, Be happy to explore that. But that being said, Raymond, do you want to add anything to this? And
Absolutely. So first of all, Ryan, thanks so much. This has just been fantastic. I'm thinking about areas for myself that I can improve on in terms of some things where I'm like, the way I approach that is a little bit of a fixed mindset. And I guess, the thing I was thinking about is you can certainly evolve to being more growth minded. And I wonder if there's like 2 or 3 tips that you can share with someone who was on this webinar today that they said to themselves, I've been a little bit in the fixed mindset. Right now I'm struggling. What kind of advice would you give me or others who are in that boat that they want to be more growth minded, but they're stuck? And how do you get started? You have some tips because I want to get to being more growth minded.
Yeah, and great question. At a really high level, developing more positive mindset is not too different than learning how to count to 10 in a different language. And learning how to count to 10 in a different language is not impossible, but it's also not the easiest thing to do in the world. But the steps are the same. So the first step in learning how to count to 10 in a different language is understanding or learning the words associated with the numbers. In terms of mindset talk, what that means is we need to put labels on mindsets, and we need to understand the different mindsets. We need to understand which mindsets are more important. And that's largely what we've done here. Because now that we have labels, then we can, now we can do something about it. Mm-hmm. And so that's the first step. Then the second step is we've got to engage in regular practice. So if I want to learn how to count to 10 in a different language, I need to spend 5 or 10 minutes a day. And over the course of a month or two, I will have learned how to become fluent. I would become fluent in counting to 10 in a different language. So what we need to do is we need to engage in exercises and activities that activate and strengthen our positive mindset neuroconnections. And some examples of these are research has found watching videos related to the positive mindsets, journaling around these, engaging in some deeper learning around these are all going to be beneficial. In fact, one really fascinating study is they exposed one group of financial professionals to a 3-minute video about how stress is debilitating, and the other group to a 3-minute video about how stress is enhancing. And then they measured their engagement, job performance, and blood pressure over the next 2 weeks. And after those 2 weeks, what they found is that those who saw the 3-minute video about how stress is enhancing had higher engagement, higher performance, and lower blood pressure. So this is one small intervention that had effects for 2 weeks. And if we could stack interventions on top of each other, we're going to see more significant shifts in the long run.
That's good advice. I see a couple of questions here from Kim and Deidre, if you want to take a look.
Yeah, so Kim says, how do success mindsets tie into positive psychology and resiliency? Really great question. I would say as a whole, the field of positive psychology kind of borders on mindsets and doesn't necessarily address them directly and hasn't really brought them in fully, but that's the undercurrent of really all positive psychology research. And there has been a lot of research on resiliency related to mindsets, particularly around fixed and growth mindsets. So what the research has found is that when we have a fixed mindset, we have a tendency to develop more helpless behaviors. And when we have a growth mindset, we have a tendency to be much more effortful and persistent and resilient. So you're going to find a lot more research or you're going to find a decent amount of research on that connection between growth and fixed mindsets and resiliency. There's just a little bit less of that with the other 2 mindsets that we've focused on. Deidre asked, what is the best way to share organizational advance mode with C-suite if they are a prevention mindset? Great question. And I think the steps kind of are the same. Is we've just got to help them, expose them to some of these ideas. We've got to put labels on these. And I think that all leaders are really well intended, and they're doing the best with what they have. And so what we've got to do is we've got to just open up their perspective a little bit more. So I apply this mindset material to leadership development a lot. I would say the historical focus on leadership development has primarily been on behaviors. And I don't think that that's a bad perspective, but what I suggest with mindsets is we just need to add that in as part of our equation. And so I don't think that this idea of mindsets disrupts what we do. I just think it's something that we've overlooked, and we just need to add it into our training and development material.
That's great. Ryan and Kim just posted a nice little thank you, nice comment. She's looking forward to checking out your book and thinks the world needs more of this, of what we covered here today. And I feel the same way, and I'm really glad that we connected and we were able to have you this afternoon. So thank you again for sharing your wisdom with us. I've learned a lot, and one of the things I'm just thinking about is the desire to be right. When I'm on a conference call and I may know the answer to something, or I would give the other the opportunity to provide the answer, or not necessarily feel like I need to be right. So I can just think of a handful of things that I can do a better job at. So thank you for that. So as we're wrapping up here, I just want to make a mention that next week on Thursday, May 7th at 2 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be back to doing a deep dive into some of the challenges that you may be facing related to the PPP, the FFCRA, furloughs, unemployment. So we're going to get back into some of the technical issues that maybe you're facing related to COVID-19. It's going to be myself, Marcia O'Connor, and Garrett Kennedy from DLA Piper. And so we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Ryan, anything else you'd like to say before we do a send-off?
No, I think you nailed some of the points that I may have mentioned, and let me just reiterate those. And I appreciate your kind of even your own vulnerability, that these concepts that we've talked about, they're just as applicable at the personal level as at the organizational level. And we focused on this as an organizational level. And I think the reason why I focus on mindsets is I've needed this work for myself probably more than anybody. And if I hadn't have made shifts in my mindsets, we just wouldn't be having this conversation. I would have never written my book. And so I just know at a very personal level, the more that we can make shifts in our mindsets, the better we are going to put ourselves in the position to be successful or more successful.
That's great. I appreciate that, Ryan. And so we did record today's session. Ryan is going to make the slide deck available to everyone. So you'll be getting some information related to that in the next day or so. So thanks, everyone. Appreciate your participating. Hang in there. We'll get through this all together. And Ryan, have a great rest of your week. We'll see everyone later.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.